Picture this. You're a young American soldier, barely 19 years old, crouched in a foxhole somewhere in the French countryside in 1944. The morning mist clings to the ground like a death shroud, and suddenly, through that ghostly veil, you hear it. The unmistakable rumble of steel tracks grinding against earth, growing louder, closer, more menacing with each passing second. Your heart pounds so hard you can feel it in your throat as you realize what's coming for you. It's not just any tank, it's one of theirs. And behind the controls sits a man whose very name strikes terror into the hearts of Allied forces across Europe. A man who has turned the art of armored warfare into a deadly symphony of destruction. Before we dive into the incredible stories of these legendary tank commanders who changed the course of history forever, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The year is 1939, and the world stands on the precipice of the most devastating conflict in human history. Europe is a powder keg waiting to explode, and the spark that will ignite this inferno is about to be lit by a new kind of warfare that will revolutionize combat forever. This isn't the trench warfare of World War I, where men died by the thousands for mere yards of muddy ground. This is something entirely different, something faster, more brutal, more decisive. The Germans have a word for it: blitzkrieg, lightning war. And at the spearhead of this revolutionary military doctrine are the tanks, those mechanical beasts of steel and fire, commanded by men who will become legends, heroes to some, nightmares to others. But here's what most people don't realize about tank warfare in World War II. It wasn't just about having the biggest gun or the thickest armor, it was about the human element, the man inside that steel coffin who had to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death, victory and defeat. These weren't just soldiers driving machines. They were artists of destruction, chess masters playing a deadly game where one wrong move could end everything. They had to read the battlefield like a book, anticipate their enemies' moves, and strike with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a hurricane. Let me take you back to a moment that changed everything. It's May 10th, 1940, and the German war machine is about to unleash hell upon Western Europe. The Ardennes forest in Belgium, thick with ancient trees and considered impassable by military experts, becomes the stage for one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history. Through those winding forest paths, where the morning light barely penetrates the canopy, comes a column of panzer tanks that stretches for miles. The sound is otherworldly, a mechanical symphony of engines roaring, tracks clanking, and steel grinding against steel. Birds flee from the trees in panic, and the very ground trembles beneath the weight of this metallic avalanche. Leading this unstoppable force is a man whose name will become synonymous with armored warfare brilliance. Heinz Guderian, the father of modern tank warfare, sits in his command vehicle. Maps spread before him, radio crackling with reports from his units. His eyes are cold, calculating, focused with the intensity of a predator stalking its prey. He's not just moving tanks through a forest, he's rewriting the rules of warfare itself. Every decision he makes in these crucial hours will echo through history, determining the fate of nations and the lives of millions. But Guderian isn't alone in this pantheon of tank warfare legends. Across the vast steppes of Eastern Europe, another name strikes fear into the hearts of Soviet tank crews. Michael Wittmann, the Panzer ace whose Tiger tank becomes a symbol of German armored might. Picture this scene. It's June 13, 1944, near the small French town of Villers-Bocage. The morning sun casts long shadows across the Normandy countryside, and the air is thick with the smell of diesel fuel and cordite. Wittmann's Tiger tank sits like a sleeping giant on a hilltop, its massive 88mm gun trained on the road below, where a British armored column is about to walk into a trap that will become legendary. The British tanks roll forward, their crews probably thinking about home, about the war ending soon, about the lives they'll return to when this nightmare is over. They have no idea that death is watching them through the crosshairs of the most feared tank in the German arsenal. Wittmann doesn't just see enemy vehicles. He sees weak points, he calculates angles. He measures distances with the precision of a mathematician and the instincts of a born killer. When he gives the order to fire, it's not just a single shot. It's the beginning of a masterpiece of destruction that will be studied in military academies for generations. The first shell screams through the morning air with a sound like the world tearing apart. It strikes the lead British tank with such force that the entire vehicle lifts off the ground for a split second, before crashing back down in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The explosion is deafening, a thunderclap that echoes across the countryside and announces to everyone within miles that the angel of death has arrived. But Whitman isn't finished. He's just getting started. His loader, a young man whose hands shake with adrenaline, but whose movements are precise and practiced, feeds another shell into the breach. The gunner, his eye pressed to the sight, his finger caressing the trigger, waits for the command that will send another enemy to their grave. One by one, the British tanks fall like dominoes in a carefully orchestrated sequence of destruction. Each shot is perfectly placed, each kill calculated to maximize both damage and psychological impact. The surviving British crews, those lucky enough to escape the initial slaughter, scramble for cover behind buildings and hedgerows, their voices cracking over the radio as they report the impossible. A single German tank has just destroyed an entire armored column. The fear in their voices is palpable, raw, primal. They've just witnessed something that defies their understanding of warfare. They've seen what happens when supreme skill meets absolute ruthlessness. If you're captivated by these incredible stories of courage, strategy, and raw human determination, smash that like button right now and share this video with someone who loves military history. Because what you're about to hear next will blow your mind. But the Eastern Front, that vast theater of unimaginable brutality and sacrifice, produces its own legends. And none more fearsome than the Soviet tank ace, who becomes known as the ghost of Stalingrad. His name is Dmitry Lavrenenko, and his story is one of vengeance, skill, and an almost supernatural ability to appear wherever the enemy least expects him. Picture the hellscape that is Stalingrad in late 1942. The city is a graveyard of buildings, a moonscape of rubble and twisted metal where every street corner could be your last. The air is thick with smoke and the stench of death, and the constant sound of artillery makes normal conversation impossible. In this apocalyptic landscape, Lavrenenko's T-34 tank moves like a phantom, striking without warning and vanishing into the maze of destruction. Before the enemy can react, Lavrenenko doesn't just fight for his country, he fights for his family, murdered by German forces during the early days of the invasion. Every German tank he destroys is a small measure of revenge for the unspeakable horrors he's witnessed. His crew, hardened by months of brutal combat, follows him with the devotion of disciples, following a Messiah. They've seen him perform miracles, turning impossible situations into stunning victories through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance. When German tankers hear the distinctive sound of a T-34 engine echoing through the ruins of Stalingrad, they know the ghost is hunting again. The psychology of these tank commanders is as fascinating as it is terrifying. They operate in a world where death is a constant companion, where the margin between victory and annihilation is measured in milliseconds. Inside their steel chariots, they're simultaneously protected and trapped, safe from small arms fire, but vulnerable to the massive anti-tank guns that can turn their sanctuary into a burning tomb in the blink of an eye. The heat inside these machines is unbearable, especially during summer campaigns. The temperature can reach over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the men inside must function at peak efficiency, while their bodies are literally cooking inside their metal shells. The smell inside a tank during combat is something that stays with you forever. It's a mixture of diesel fuel, cordite from fired shells, sweat, fear, and sometimes blood. The noise is deafening, a cacophony of engine roar, track clatter, and the metallic ping of bullets bouncing off armor. Radio communications are often impossible, forcing commanders to make critical decisions based on limited information and pure instinct. In this environment, only the strongest, smartest, and most ruthless survive to become legends. Consider the case of Kurt Nispel, the German tank ace, who remains the highest-scoring tank commander in history with 168 confirmed kills. Unlike the stereotypical image of a cold, calculating Prussian officer, Nispel is a rough-around-the-edges soldier who cares more about protecting his men than following military protocol. He's the kind of leader who inspires absolute loyalty, not through fear, but through his proven ability to bring his crew home alive. His tank becomes a symbol of hope for German forces on the Eastern Front, a beacon of resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. Picture Nispel's final battle, fought in the dying days of the war, when Germany's defeat is all but certain. The Soviet forces are closing in like a tidal wave of steel and fire. And every German unit is fighting a desperate rearguard action. Nispel's panzer sits hull down behind a railway embankment, its gun trained on a road where Soviet armor will soon appear. He knows this is likely his last fight, but there's no fear in his eyes, only grim determination. His crew, men who have followed him through years of hell, prepare their weapons with the mechanical precision of professionals who have done this dance of death countless times before. The first Soviet tank appears on the horizon. AT-34, moving at full speed with its guns swiveling back and forth, searching for targets. Nispel watches through his periscope, calculating range and lead time with the skill of a master craftsman. He doesn't just see an enemy tank, he sees a mathematical problem to be solved, a puzzle that requires the perfect combination of timing, aim, and nerve. When he gives the order to fire, his voice is calm, almost conversational, as if he's ordering coffee rather than dealing death. The shell strikes its target with devastating precision, and another Soviet tank becomes a funeral pyre on the battlefield. But the Soviets keep coming. Wave after wave of armor rolls forward, and Nispel's tank becomes the focal point of their attack. Shells scream overhead, striking the ground around his position with earth-shaking impacts. The air fills with smoke and flying debris, and the metallic taste of fear begins to creep into every man's mouth. Still, Nispel continues to fight, his tank spitting fire and death at every enemy that dares to show itself. Each kill is a small victory against the inevitable, a defiant gesture in the face of overwhelming odds. The end comes suddenly, as it always does in tank warfare. A Soviet anti-tank round, fired from a concealed position, strikes Nispel's tank with the force of a lightning bolt. The explosion is instantaneous, a brilliant flash that turns night into day for a brief moment before darkness claims everything. When the smoke clears, the greatest tank ace in history is gone, but his legend lives on in the minds of every tanker who heard his story. The American tank commanders fighting in the European theater bring their own unique style to armored warfare. They're not fighting for conquest or ideology, but for the simple desire to go home to their families and the life they left behind. Men like Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, known as the War Daddy, who leads his Sherman tank crew through some of the most vicious fighting of the war. Poole's tank, nicknamed In the Mood, becomes a symbol of American determination and ingenuity, proving that superior tactics and crew coordination can overcome technical disadvantages. Poole's story is one of transformation. From a young man who's never seen combat to a hardened veteran who can read a battlefield like a book. His first taste of combat comes during the Normandy invasion, when his Sherman tank rolls off a landing craft into the chaos of the D-Day beaches. The scene is pure pandemonium. Artillery shells explode in towering columns of sand and seawater. Machine gun bullets zip through the air like angry hornets, and the cries of wounded men mix with the roar of engines and the crash of waves. In this hellscape, Poole discovers something about himself that he never knew existed. An almost supernatural ability to stay calm under fire and make the right decisions when lives hang in the balance. The Sherman tank, while inferior to German designs in terms of armor and firepower, becomes a weapon of devastating effectiveness in the hands of skilled American crews. Poole learns to use his tank's superior mobility and reliability to outmaneuver heavier German armor, striking from unexpected angles and withdrawing before the enemy can respond. His crew, initially a collection of young men from different backgrounds who barely knew each other, becomes a family bound together by shared danger and mutual dependence. They eat together, sleep together, and fight together, each man knowing that his survival depends on the skill and courage of his teammates. The psychological toll of tank warfare is something that's rarely discussed, but always present. These men live in a constant state of hypervigilance, knowing that death can come at any moment from any direction. The stress manifests in different ways. Some become aggressive, seeking out combat as a way to release the tension that builds up inside them. Others become withdrawn, retreating into themselves as a defense mechanism against the horrors they witness daily. Many develop superstitions, small rituals that they believe will keep them alive for another day. A lucky charm, a special prayer, a particular way of loading ammunition. Anything that might tip the scales in their favor. The camaraderie among tank crews is unlike anything found in other branches of the military. When you're locked inside a steel box with 3 or 4 other men, Facing death on a daily basis, you develop bonds that transcend normal friendship. These men share everything: their fears, their hopes, their memories of home, their dreams for the future. They know each other's habits, their strengths and weaknesses, their tells when they're scared or angry or homesick. This intimacy creates a fighting unit that's more than the sum of its parts, a collective consciousness that can react to threats and opportunities with almost telepathic coordination. The technical aspects of tank warfare require a level of skill that few people can appreciate. The gunner must be able to hit moving targets at distances of over a mile, while his own vehicle is bouncing and swaying over rough terrain. The driver must navigate through smoke, dust, and darkness, while avoiding obstacles and enemy fire. The commander must process information from multiple sources simultaneously, making tactical decisions that affect not just his own crew, but often entire units. The loader must keep the gun fed with ammunition, while the tank is being thrown around like a toy in a hurricane. Each position requires years of training to master, and the best crews develop an almost supernatural coordination that allows them to function as a single organism. The evolution of tank warfare throughout World War II is a story of constant adaptation and innovation. Early in the war, tanks are used primarily as mobile artillery, supporting infantry attacks and breaking through enemy lines. But as the conflict progresses, tank versus tank combat becomes increasingly common, turning armored warfare into a deadly chess match where positioning, timing, and crew skill determine the outcome. The Germans initially dominate this new form of combat, but the Allies quickly adapt, developing new tactics and technologies that eventually tip the balance in their favor. The development of tank-killing weapons becomes an arms race that drives innovation on both sides. The Germans developed the fearsome 88mm anti-tank gun, a weapon so effective that it can penetrate the armor of any Allied tank at ridiculous distances. The Allies respond with improved armor designs, better tactics, and eventually, tanks that can match German firepower. This constant evolution means that tank commanders must continuously adapt their methods, learning new techniques and discarding old ones as the nature of combat changes around them. The impact of these legendary tank commanders extends far beyond their individual kill counts or tactical victories. They become symbols of their nation's military prowess, inspiring their countrymen and striking fear into their enemies. Their stories are told and retold, growing into legends that inspire future generations of soldiers. The techniques they develop become standard doctrine, taught in military academies around the world. Their influence on modern armored warfare can still be seen today in the tactics used by tank crews from Israel to Iraq, from Korea to Afghanistan. The psychological warfare aspect of tank combat is often overlooked, but incredibly important. The mere presence of a legendary tank commander on the battlefield can affect the morale of both friendly and enemy forces. Knowing that Michael Whitman is somewhere in the area can cause Allied units to become more cautious, more hesitant, less aggressive. Conversely, German forces fight with renewed confidence when they know they have the support of a proven tank ace. This psychological dimension adds another layer of complexity to what is already the most challenging form of combat imaginable. The training of tank crews during World War II is brutal and comprehensive. New recruits are subjected to months of intense instruction covering everything from basic vehicle maintenance to advanced gunnery techniques. They learn to strip and reassemble their weapons blindfolded, to identify enemy vehicles by their silhouettes, to calculate firing solutions in their heads while under extreme stress. The physical demands are enormous. Operating a tank requires strength, endurance, and the ability to function in extremely uncomfortable conditions for hours or even days at a time. The logistics of tank warfare are staggering in their complexity. A single tank requires hundreds of gallons of fuel, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and constant maintenance to remain combat effective. Supply lines must stretch across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, often under enemy fire. Tank commanders must constantly balance their aggressive instincts with the practical limitations of their logistics, knowing that running out of fuel or ammunition in the middle of a battle is a death sentence. The best commanders develop an almost instinctive understanding of these limitations, pushing their machines to the absolute limit without crossing the line into recklessness. The medical challenges of tank warfare are particularly gruesome. When a tank is hit by enemy fire, the crew often suffers horrific burns from flaming fuel or hydraulic fluid. The confined space makes it difficult to render aid to wounded crew members, and evacuation is often impossible while under fire. Tank commanders must make terrible decisions about whether to risk their entire crew to save one wounded man, balancing loyalty to their comrades against their responsibility to the mission. These moral dilemmas haunt many tank veterans long after the war ends. The winter warfare on the Eastern Front presents unique challenges that test tank crews to their absolute limits. Temperatures drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze metal and make it brittle. Tank engines must be kept running constantly to prevent them from freezing solid, consuming precious fuel even when not in combat. The crew must deal with frostbite, hypothermia, and the constant fear that their tank might break down in the middle of nowhere, leaving them stranded in a frozen wasteland where death comes quickly to the unprepared. The urban warfare in cities like Stalingrad and Berlin creates a different kind of hell for tank crews. The narrow streets and tall buildings create perfect ambush sites for enemy infantry armed with anti-tank weapons. Tanks become sitting ducks, unable to maneuver effectively and vulnerable to attack from multiple directions. The psychological stress of urban combat is enormous, as death can come from any window, any doorway, any pile of rubble. Tank commanders must develop new tactics on the fly, learning to use their vehicle's capabilities in an environment they were never designed for. The night fighting capability of different tank designs becomes crucial as the war progresses. Early tanks have limited vision equipment, making night operations extremely dangerous. Crews must rely on their hearing and intuition to navigate and fight in complete darkness, often engaging enemies they can't see based on muzzle flashes and engine sounds. The development of infrared vision systems and better periscopes gives some tanks a significant advantage in night combat. But these technologies are limited and often unreliable. The impact of weather on tank operations is constantly underestimated by military planners, but well understood by experienced tank commanders. Rain turns dirt roads into impassable quagmires. Snow creates mobility problems and visibility issues. And extreme heat can cause engines to overheat and ammunition to cook off spontaneously. Desert warfare presents its own unique challenges, with sand getting into every mechanical system and the sun turning tank interiors into ovens. Tank commanders must become meteorologists, constantly monitoring weather conditions and adjusting their tactics accordingly. The evolution of radio communications revolutionizes tank warfare during World War II. Early tanks often operate in isolation, unable to coordinate with other units or call for support. The introduction of reliable radio systems allows tank commanders to function as part of larger formations, coordinating attacks and sharing intelligence in real time. This technological advance enables the development of more sophisticated tactics, but it also creates new vulnerabilities as enemy forces learn to intercept and jam radio communications. The role of tank commanders in combined arms operations becomes increasingly important as the war progresses. They must learn to work effectively with infantry, artillery, and air support, coordinating their movements and attacks to achieve maximum effectiveness. This requires a different skill set than pure tank versus tank combat, as commanders must understand the capabilities and limitations of other military branches and adjust their tactics accordingly. The best tank commanders become experts in all aspects of combined arms warfare, able to function effectively in any combat situation. The maintenance and repair of tanks under combat conditions is a constant challenge that requires incredible skill and dedication. Tank crews must be able to perform complex repairs while under enemy fire, often using improvised tools and materials. The mechanical complexity of tanks means that even minor problems can render a vehicle combatant effective, so preventive maintenance becomes crucial. Tank commanders must balance the need to keep their vehicles in fighting condition with the demands of combat operations, often working through the night to ensure their tanks are ready for the next day's battles. The capture and utilization of enemy tanks becomes a common practice as the war progresses and equipment becomes scarce. Tank commanders must learn to operate unfamiliar vehicles, often with limited training and no technical manuals. This requires incredible adaptability and mechanical intuition, as the crew must figure out foreign control systems and weapon mechanisms while under combat conditions. The psychological impact of seeing your own tanks in enemy hands is significant, as it undermines confidence in your equipment and tactics. The development of specialized tank variants for specific missions creates new opportunities and challenges for tank commanders. Tank destroyers, self-propelled artillery, bridge-laying tanks, and flamethrower tanks all require different tactics and skills. Commanders must become experts in multiple vehicle types, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each design. This specialization allows for more effective combined arms operations, but also increases the complexity of training and logistics. The final battles of World War II see tank commanders fighting in increasingly desperate circumstances as their nations face defeat. German tank aces like Nisbel and Whitman continue fighting against overwhelming odds, knowing that defeat is inevitable but unable to abandon their duty to their men and their country. Soviet and Allied tank commanders press forward into the heart of Nazi Germany, driven by the knowledge that final victory is within reach, but still facing determined resistance from elite German units. These legendary tank commanders leave behind a legacy that extends far beyond their individual achievements. They prove that, in the age of mechanized warfare, the human element remains supreme. Technology, tactics, and equipment are important, but it's the men inside the machines who determine victory or defeat. Their stories inspire future generations of soldiers and continue to influence military doctrine and training to this day. They remind us that, even in the midst of humanity's darkest hour, individual courage and skill can shine through the darkness and change the course of history. The psychological aftermath of tank warfare haunts many veterans long after the guns fall silent. The constant stress of combat, the loss of close friends, and the moral weight of taking lives creates wounds that never fully heal. Many tank commanders struggle with what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder. But in their era, these psychological injuries are poorly understood and often ignored. The men who once commanded steel monsters on the battlefield must learn to live with the memories of what they've seen and done, carrying their experiences in silence for the rest of their lives. The technological legacy of World War II tank warfare continues to influence modern military design and doctrine. The lessons learned by commanders like Guderian, Whitman, and Patton become the foundation for contemporary armored warfare tactics. Modern tank crews still study the battles fought by these legendary commanders, learning from their successes and failures. The principles of mobility, firepower, and protection that defined tank warfare in the 1940s remain relevant today, even as technology continues to evolve. The stories of these tank commanders remind us that war is ultimately a human endeavor, fought by individuals who must make life-and-death decisions under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. They show us that courage comes in many forms, from the desperate last stand of a German tank ace to the methodical advance of an American Sherman crew. Their legacy is not just in the battles they won or the enemies they defeated, but in the example they set for future generations of soldiers who must face their own trials in the crucible of combat. In the end, these tank commanders were ordinary men who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances and rose to meet the challenges that history placed before them. They remind us that heroism is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite that fear. Their stories continue to inspire us because they represent the best of human courage, skill, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the stories of World War II as most legendary tank commanders. If you want to hear more epic tales of courage, sacrifice, and military brilliance, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. These stories of human courage and determination deserve to be remembered and shared. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore more incredible chapters from the pages of military history.